Obviously, like, when people see, like, plays, like, when I was growing up, when Vampire Hour was started, I don't think there was a lot of personal information, about who I was, nor that, right? Like, you saw this William Inge that was the first play I wrote, outside of school. And so, it was kind of about the things I was interested in, very rarely about me. And the last few years, that has kind of become like the crux of my work. Vietgone, for your residents, the new Playwright, it kind of deeply deals with how I grew up as a storyteller, as a person. I always tell this is the story I always tell when it comes down to like how I find it. They do a lot of different things. They do film and TV and theater. I'm writing a book now. I just did a fight choreograph. And you're like, what are you? And I was like, well, I guess essentially, I always thought it was an introverted theater because my interest in film. I feel like I'm an introverted film because I spent 15 years doing theater. I feel like I'm an introvert in martial arts because I kind of just want to do things that are cool and not really about things about self-defense. And so so I always feel like I was a little bit outside of everything that I love. So the word that kind of like finally clicked to me, that made me go, oh, that's what I am, is the word storyteller. I'm just a storyteller. That's what I do. I tell stories on stage, I tell stories in books, I tell stories in stories. And stories have always been integral to who I am. And to understand that, I was like, when I go, oh, we can go a little time machine, go backwards, like 1983, when I was a little kid, third grade, for the first time, doing what was called a standardized test. And this is kind of like the moment when things started to define themselves, right? Because like when I was a kid, there's like three things I knew definitively about myself. One, the war was real. Two, way too mature to on the ground. And three, Qui Nguyen was black. And you're like, what? Did you not have eyeballs when you were in the third grade? And it wasn't that I thought it was actually African American. It was because in 1983, the standardized test, when you're filling out the forms, the standardized questions were name, sex, race. And race in Arkansas was defined by these three categories only. It was white, black, other. That was it. And as a kid, I was like, absolutely, I know what other is. Like a vampire, a zombie, or so I happened to be either white or black, but I don't know what. So I knew what any 8-year-old does. I cheated. So I looked over to my friend and said, and I was like, he was like, I'm black. And I was like, cool. Now that you answered that, what am I? And he looks at me and he's like, well, you're not black. You should have been black. And I was like, all right. So I filled out a magnet. I sent it to, I did the test work. I sent it up. I kind of waited, worried that my teacher was going to yell at me. She did. And waited until a week later, waiting for the school principal to release students and say that I messed up. So, a month later, statement saying, so I guess, it was right. I was black. And in this moment, this is an important detail. I grew up in this very small town called El Dorado, Arkansas, where basically the population there was basically white and black. And that was it. There was no one that looked like me. And in this moment where I suddenly pulled out a little Scantron moment, and sent it to my teacher that was defined by someone else other than myself, I suddenly felt like I fit in somewhere. Even though I actually did it, and maybe I don't know if I actually ever truly believed I did it, but for a moment, maybe I did. Maybe I was like, oh, I know who is part of, who I'm part of here at the school. And it was like kind of a momentary moment of just feeling value that I hadn't felt. And then about a month later, a movie called Rambo 2 came out, where Rambo fights Vietnamese people, and then suddenly every little boy on the playground kind of quickly reminded me that I was truly not black or white, I was truly black. And I remember being completely devastated. I went home, I cried, and I told my grandma all about it, and she kind of like, without hesitation, was like, look, the reason why these kids are bullied is because what you don't realize is this town, this little town that you live in, is the only town where not everybody can. The rest of so they're just kids. They don't know what they're doing. So please forgive them. They don't, they're being jerks to their jobs. And of course, I figured that out. Maybe it took me a little bit longer than I should have. Because in my parents, in her defense, anytime I went out of town, we would go to Shreveport, where there's a huge Vietnamese population. The Vietnamese kind of small area, little sunshine, Houston. So when I left town, everyone in America was
You talked about like the VHS diet.
And I had no game. And so my parents, everything we saw was just like movie rentals, and they only rented 20 movies. And so like my world was like, you're right. The world is just full of Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan, Jet Li. And these towns that I went into. But then once I realized that it was all bullshit, I finally asked my grandma, like, you lied to me. And she's like, no, I just told you a story. The story you need to be here. And I was like, oh, well that's profound. But then I started realizing at that point my grandma told me a lot of stuff. All the time. And I finally went to my grandma. I was like, grandma, you stories. Why? Because you don't just it's like my relationship with grandma, but there's something about my view. And it was like all the time. And finally, my grandma was like, well, the reason why I tell you such stories is it's kind of the only thing I have. Because when we escaped Vietnam, I was able to bring, take money or jewelry or even family photos. So all I have inside me that has any value to anyone else in this world is stories I have. And so that's why I tell it. Because if I don't tell you, then the only thing that has value is waste. And, as a little kid, I realized, shit, that's all you need of it. And I was like, well, that's what I kind of want to do for the rest of my life. I just want to tell stories. I want to tell stories from my family. I want to tell stories that I care about. I want to tell stories that empower people who don't see themselves on stage or on screen. And that was the heartbeat of who I am. It took me a while to figure out how I was made, but it was a thing that kind of, embodied, the spirit of who I was. As a little kid, I spent a lot of time talking about this.
And you went, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like there was a time when you were young when you were like writer or journalist, and then it shifted to acting at one point, and then you went to acting school.
Okay. Yes.
I'm not saying that to correct you. I'm saying that to tee you up for tell me about that story about going to acting school, theater, how that started. Because there was a general writing, and then there was theater more specifically.
The general story of Vietgone was I didn't immediately I want to tell stories, and I went out and wanted to make movies. It was I want to tell stories. But I was also a little boy in Arkansas, and so I was like, I want to play football. And so I played football, and then I stopped growing when I was 15, and then went back to practice, and everyone was bigger than me. And they're like, well, you're the shortest corner ever, so I'll be no running back. And they gave me the ball, and I took space and just run. I was like, okay, I can do that. And then my two friends, Jared and Aaron, tackled me like this and crushed me. And I got out, and I was like, I've never been tackled before. I don't like it. I'm not going to do that anymore. And so I was like a sad sophomore, this is the 90s, and the gospel was really and he said, you can't do this anymore, but maybe we follow this with you, gospel wasn't into that, audition for a play, so you can talk to him. I was like, yeah, I'll do that. So I kind of I'll go get a girlfriend. So I called him just to talk to him, this small student, the drama teacher was like, if you come into the theater during an audition, you have to. I just wanted to talk to okay, what do I do? So I picked up the script, I read it, and she asked me, and that kind of began my high school love story. But I was like, I'm not this isn't what people do. This is crazy. And then but I did want to do it. I was my mom convinced me that there's no money. a very large market. But there's no money in film or TV. So what you need to do is like every town has a newspaper. So you should be a journalist. So that's writing, but it's practical. You can write anywhere. You can even make your own radio. They're okay, fine, I'll do that. And so I went to Louisiana. That's kind of one whole week, and they sent me to my first like feature society, which is really before I club. And I listened to their thing, and just come back and tell us later on the weekend. Like, of course we do. And I was like, cool. So I wrote that first story, and then I quit. Really good at that. And then I walked over to the theater club. I was like, hey, I'm about to make a theater. And they're like, okay, let's do it. I did a monologue. I got to do it international for 3 years as an actor. And then my junior year, or maybe my senior year of undergrad, I realized the very harsh truth. I was a really shitty actor. I'm real bad.
You'll always say you're bad.
Oh, no,
I don't think that's entirely
I'm
true.
a really bad actor. And I was like, I'm about to gradually create something terrible. I need to find something else to do. And my advisor was like, what do you like to write? And he thought about maybe going to school for playwright. I was like, sure. And so I quickly wrote a whole bunch of quick 10-minute plays, and then just went and started applying for grad schools. And then we were going to go you, where I thought. And that's
The other thing that I think is interesting about Louisiana Tech, which it's sort of famous for, is that they have a really big stage combat, like, fight culture, right? So, like, Qui was doing all this acting stuff, but also, like the full range of SDFC, whatever it's called, certification, right? So, as AFD. So you get Society of American Fight Directors, right? So you came out as like a fully certified actor combatant, and in fact, like when we were in grad school and we all had assistantships, and I was busy like teaching intro to acting for non-majors. It was like what I was doing. Qui was like teaching the grad students the fight class and like choreographing all the plays, and like so that as a method of storytelling was a thing that you were kind of like a craft. Physical storytelling was a craft you were learning and honing kind of simultaneously to your writing journey.
Yeah, I think probably it's weird because I think that though as I transitioned from theater to film, like I almost feel like my fight choreography, my years of being a fight director was actually probably more helpful in a lot of ways for that transition into becoming a film director and film screenwriter. Because that was a purely visual storytelling. Right? There was no words that could lean on when I was in a fight. And so while some of my peers were kind of struggling with that transition, it's like, oh, different brain engaged. Like you're going to tell the story, you're just images, whether they find it or actually whatever.
And like years of experience talking directly to actors.
Yes.
Like basically directing actors. Right? Okay, so then you go off to grad school, and what when you got to grad school, what did you think you were there to write?
I think I was there to learn how to write good plays. Does that make sense? Like I think I was there to kind of you start out, you have to learn your basic structures and all that stuff. But I thought when I showed up that because you had to make some kind of statement to your professor like why are you coming here, and my thing was like I wanted to tell my family I want like the reading of all dreams is tell my family stories on stage or on screen, whatever. That's the thing. And like the problem was like this gets into personal, but the problem was the first day of graduate school, my grandma, who obviously was a union, passed away. And she passed away, she's still living. And I was like, oh, I really don't want to tell sad. And that became a conflict. Like I actually became like, oh, I didn't, because I wanted to know my family story, the lack of my family values. Well, for the next few years, it was me about my family, it was just me uncontrolled. And so, luckily, during that time, I always go like there's been like 3 people in my life which there's a strike, a football strike. So they have to all these like a lot of football players are put together with these wannabes. Regardless, it's a sports film. At the end, I got choked up when they won, and I cried. And at the same time, we're going to grad school, watching all these very stuffy classes that I gave $2 about. I'm sorry, I shouldn't.
It's a problem.
Okay, before I continue the story, I was just point out, since I started working with Disney, I've gotten really good at taking swearing out of my language when I'm talking to public people.
Because I said fucking a lot of words today.
I got really good. I'm not gonna make that mistake here. You're nothing from it also. But after seeing the place, Robert was noticed how do we film more for this stupid football movie than we do for all these great pieces of theater? And I was like, Robert, you're right. And that's when we should make football. No.
When they're saving the Earth from the asteroid that's crashing in, and we're just like, oh my god, it's so moving, and then we see the great works of the canon, and we're just like, whoa, this is
Less words.
Yeah. And yet it's not like I'm going to argue that Armageddon is a brilliant work of art. It's sort of manipulative and kind of cliche, but yet we're having an emotional reaction. It feels like that is important. That's maybe more important.
And so Robert and I had this multi-hour, multi-year conversation over what it should be.
We ran into each other in the comic book shop.
Which in the 90s, going to a comic book shop was basically catching someone in pornography. It was almost completely covered in stars. No one watched these.
We were in serious grad school, and we were sort of hey, oh! Yeah, I wanted it for a manicure.
And so then Robert we love all these comic books, let's start. What would happen if we wrote a play that was for the grad students, that just was about having it? And that's where it began. That began what would ultimately become that markup.
Yeah, and we wanted to put all this stuff science fiction and horror and martial arts and all of these genre that we liked in popular storytelling mediums. We're why can't we tell those stories on stage? And this was an attempt to do that.
The second person was this woman, this lady friend, came into my life. Because right after grad school, Robert and I decided to do some friendship. And just to be clear, when Robert and I decided to make a video, I was talking about it. I was like, Robert, we should make a theater. And Robert, he was 4 years older than me. I did it. Trust me, take over. And I was like, Mother, you haven't started with me. I don't know why I'd be different than anybody else. I had my ambition, but I was like, oh, we're going to do it. And I got this small little grant from two buddy dramas called The Bandmaker. And it's $10,000 that came with it. It was $5,000 for my grant. And the other $5,000, I was like, we're going to do a shot.
Yeah, and an incredibly generous, it was money for young writer to here, this is to help you get by. And we took half of that, and the other half was towards this group's project, which was, I think, it was not easy to come by 5K at that time.
And so we put her to the first show, and we used our living rooms as our rehearsal hall, and our roommates were our actors. And then we put the show in this theater festival. And this is our first show as grad school. And in grad school, you did a show, and all the students would show up. But in real life, if you do a show and you don't tell anyone about it, so the audience
didn't know anyone.
Our audience was literally just the reviewer. And this one girl that I met who I thought was cute. And afterwards, I was like, well, I guess that's not going to work out. That was it. And she very lovely. Who said, you and Robert are actually pretty good artists, but you're terrible producers. But guess what? Ryan, I would like mission statement is we're geek theater. I was like, no, geek theater. And my stupid suggestion was like, I can't put that down in our grant things because they're going to actually think we're a Greek theater. And everyone's like, you think someone called Vampire Cowboys is going to be mistaken for Greek theater?
People give us so much shit about the name too in the early years. They're like, you don't want to call it that. And they're like, we kind of do.
And so she got her first grant. But the thing that kind of was the big, bold invention of Abby Marcus, who, spoiler, I don't remember, was the fact that she's like, we're not going to find a regular theater. There's no way we're going to find a theater that says you do it. So I'm going to spend my own money to get us a booth, this thing that just started in New York. And she got us a booth, the second year, it was still very, very small. We got a booth there. But the original invention of hers was she noticed that there was like a stage there. And she's like, what's going on? And she's like, she just went to the booth, she's like, hey, you notice there's like an empty stage up there. What is that for? Like, well, if we have like speakers and stuff, that's where they'd be. We don't have any.
There's some kind of live performance. It's a reading.
And so she was like, we can populate and perform in that stage. And so she was like, hey, we get all our actors and just choreograph fights and just go on that stage. And then they're like, who are you? Well, we're going to park out with Group 309. And that's where our first fighters come from. And we didn't realize, and then New York Comic Con finally did sponsor this, so then the booth was free from now on. But then we had a legitimate all over the comic book world. But what we didn't realize was non-theater people, specifically people who look at the world through the lens of cinema, they don't understand that your first preview is in like a movie. They think that when they think of going to a movie, they want to go on the first day. Unlike regular theater people who wait till post previews when the show's locked down. And so suddenly we sold out like our preview period. But then when they found out that there was never going to be a DVD afterwards to buy, they're like, well, how do I get to see it again? And we have to see it again. Well, fine. So they then would buy tickets for every following weekend. So by the first performance, we were sold out like the entire run. Like basically the next day. I'm just spending a lot of time complaining about that. She's very smart.
It's Italians all the time, right? That there are like artists who are excited about making work with all their friends that they train with, and they come to a place and they make that work together, which is great. The work can be good, but like you gotta get people in to see it and get the word out, and often that is a separate skill set than the skill set that is like we're good at making work. And so I feel like we were all very lucky to find each other because that allowed this to happen. You know, like I don't know that we'd be here now if you and I had done like 5 of those shows and 6 people came. Like,
and then the third person was my mom. And she, it was because I finally did write a play about the family. It's called Child Over. And it came out at the same time as this play. And it was a play that I had written in grad school, where I followed every note. That was everything from all my professors. It was like this story about my cousin turning to America. But I moved around, resituated characters that basically fit 3-act romantic structure. Great.
But it needs a villain. Yeah. It needs to have Vietnamese in it. It needs to throw all these things around.
And of course, like our grant proposal sounded good, like they did like it. And it got confused, and on the night of the opening night, my mom was there. And like, everyone was very nice.
But off-Broadway did you do? Big deal.
And I looked at my mom, and she just kind of sat there like confounded. And I was like, you seem troubled, what's wrong? She's like, this doesn't sound like you. I was like, what the fuck do you mean it doesn't sound like you? You've never read a single word of my writing. It's not about you writing your part. It's just, you're like kind of a punk, kind of just genius, jerk all who does whatever you want, you're random and clearly have ADHD. But none of that is on that stage. This is like, it feels like someone else wrote it. And I was like, screw you, Mom. I'll write plays like that. I'll show you. And she was absolutely. And then, eventually, after being finally did get brave enough to start telling the stories that I always wanted to tell, with my mom and my dad. And I was Vietgone before we all read it. And it was combining this style that Robert and I created that really defined my voice. With the stories I always wanted to tell, that I finally got brave enough to tell. It kind of basically changed my life. You know, like I've written, I don't know, like 25, 30, 20 at this point. But I'm probably only 4 good ones. And those, because it took a while. Like I always say, like, you know, there's some artists that just from the womb knew who they were. You know, I was like, there's 3 things that define. They will give you just I'll look at you guys because you guys are starting out to one day, like when you ever ask a fucking professional, all these guys up here, you ask a professional, like, how do you have a career? These guys help you with this. And we're all going to say something similar to the fact, like, it's not every path is different. There's no one way, there's no secret school. There is. And the secret is this. I've done this a long time, and I've worked with everyone from celebrities to working artists to people who've done it in life. And those who do it constantly always have these 3 attributes. Doesn't come from me. And those 3 attributes is tenacity, the ability to never give up, even though you're going to fall, because you're going to fail. That's it. Part of doing this is failing fundamentally. Falling your grades, and it's about how you look at it. The Instagram, I can tell you, you learn nothing, you learn everything from failure, you learn nothing from success. And I can tell you that is absolute. 2, voice. This is the thing that is probably more the phantom of what we do. Because some people have a voice forever. Like writers, and I'm one of them speaking writers. Like Annie Baker had a voice as soon as she started writing. Brandon Jeffrey Jenkins. There's some artists that just, that just knew what stories they wanted to tell and how they wanted to tell them as soon as they came out. And then there's people like me who had to take years of experimenting, writing, trying, failing, to start to slowly pick at finding who the hell I am. And then that uniqueness, I think Andrew said at some point, we all can tell stories. Telling stories, that's not the unique thing is telling stories. The unique thing is you're only in the story. It takes a while sometimes to figure out how to get your own stories. Robert said that book Marshall Norman did it, and then it's like anybody can write, but what makes you special, right? It's special. So those are 2. And then the third one I was thinking very, very important is follow. The ability to do and not just. I've spent so much of my time hearing people tell me about things they want to do, and rarely do I get to respond to me. And so to me, it's almost more impressive to go, hey, go make a 7-minute movie instead of telling me about the whole movie you want. Just go make a 10-minute play. Don't ask me to help you produce the full-length play, because that 10-minute play may lead into the other thing. So doing the chance to make a thing is always going to be the thing, right? I know some people will be able to get it. I'm sorry, I ignored all of you. But those always get the 3 components that I was thinking. You can anywhere you're in your journey, if you're like, hey, what am I lacking? Do I have tenacity, voice, quality? These things are working out. I can promise you're going to get somewhere. I don't know if you'll ever get to where you want it, but you'll get somewhere. I'm not where I wanted. I didn't know where I am and where I was going to go. I'm a small kid from some small town. I didn't know that any of the shit that I'm doing right now was even a thing that was easily want. So that's my just 3 guys, and I'll go back. I just wanted to get 3 guys. But those are the 3 people that think about. I don't even know the original question.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think what we'll do is another 6-ish minutes of talking, and then we'll open up to Q&A. But because I think it's you talking about your voice, I think is super interesting, and I feel like, I certainly went into grad school thinking I'm here to learn to write Shakespeare, Chekhov, and classics. I thought that's my pathway. It's not my path at all. But I think when we got into it, it's like you had this 2-track thing that you were trying to write these kinds of plays and these kinds of plays, and they were forever separate. And then there became a aha moment, and we were like, what if those were the same one?
Yeah.
Can you want to talk about that?
I mean,
Like,
I think I did.
You did.
Oh, I mean, yeah.
but it's like, because I remember, like, you saying at one point that, like, I don't know, we thought, like, Memoir Cowboys was a thing
Right.
to do on the side. You were going to be a serious playwright who did some crazy Memoir Cowboy stuff on the side. And then there came a moment where you became, like, the serious playwright who writes Memoir Cowboy was the kind of about your family. You know, and that was this, like, okay, so then, what about like film and television and all in Hollywood? Like, how did you go from like downtown playwright to like that person?
Yeah. I mean, failure. I mean, like it was a huge like failure. I always like when I said failure, like it was like Robert will remember this period in my life. Like my wife and I had separated. Because, you know, I think, you know, when we were doing that partner, we were, I'll say, we were like this hot shit going on. Everybody liked hanging out with it. They would be doing these great parties. Everybody, you know, we were like the most beloved bunch of losers in New York. It was the best. It was so fun.
There's no damn money, but
It was
like,
so fun. And then my wife and I fully fit. And it turns out like two clubs about my reviews or popularity, they just want to be fed. And that kind of pressure just compounded itself to the point where my wife and I was just this person who was like the most important person in my life, we fractured. We were just it was done. And I remember like I'm not gonna name any actors I don't want to call out movies. But there was an actor friend of mine who simultaneously had a similar thing happen. One of my closest friends. And I was sitting at this restaurant named the Olive Restaurant. There's an Olive Diner over near NYU. It's across the street. Yeah. We were sitting there. We ordered like very small meals, and we both couldn't afford it. And I was like, shit. I had to call my mom. I said, hey mom, do you have money? She said, okay. So we had to like just talk, and he had like his girlfriend broken up with him. She was not doing well. And I told her about having both of us. Dude, I think you messed up. I think and I remember he was very much like, I have one audition. I have one commission. And I was like, and then from that point on, we're done, and I'm just going to try to just be it. I don't think Kathy and I are going to just be it. And so, knowing this was it, we go through every bit of our soul to jump to the salvation. For me, it was this one. And the one play was Vietgone. And for him, it was the future, I don't want to do enough. But we'll just say that at the end of this, I mean, he really, 1 year later, like our lives completely transformed. Because we took every bit of ourselves into this last little trip of going, okay, this is it. This is my one thing. I'll write that story I've always wanted to write. He's like, I am just going to put every bit of who I am on that screen, regardless of that directly on it. And that's where you're later. Not only do our relationships get better, you kind of like put them primary focus versus secondary. And then suddenly the play did really well, his audition really well, and we ended up a year later in Los Angeles. I was on my first movie year, and he was starring. And I was just like, holy crap, I couldn't believe that was good about one. And it really was like the fact that like I was literally took real failure for me to figure out what was next. I had like literally like looking to the dark to get myself out. But that's the emotional part of it. But like I think the transition from theater to film was basically like it was just like this pure desire to like get like maybe I had dreams about coming to TV, sure. But what I definitely had was just desperately to feed my kids. And so I started like working TV and film and literally the thing, and I remember this day, like the manager was like, hey, that thing that makes you weird in theater, it's actually an attribute for your theater position. So you should not be quiet about it. And so I wasn't quiet about it. And then, you know, it got direct a movie, and they have to write a movie. Like it's hard working up because people write it. Like I think that who's that guy? It took a lot of failure to get it right.
It was good to be in the comic book show.
It was good to be in the comic book show. I was good. I became a writer for the Vietnamese-American. I started theater company because I felt like being able to do shows, and I ended up in going to TV because I felt like making a theater play, but maybe not. So it took a lot of failure.
I think on that note, we should open it up for questions. Any questions, thoughts, criticism, ideas?
So throughout the play, Living Dead in Denmark, there is kind of an underlying theme of zombies are people too. And I was wondering, where did that inspiration come from? Was it like just kind of like a cool theme that has never really been explored, or was that like a let's throw something in there just to kind of shake things up?
Zombie horror movie as a metaphor for the world is not my invention. George Romero is doing that with like Dawn of the Dead, or consumerism or something like that. And so ours was like very didactic. It was about racism, and it was about getting the other. It was like how do you tell? The thing about Vampire Hour was that we were just for those who don't know, Vampire Hour was like a theater company we had, and what we were known for is doing these like pop culture shows that had superheroes and sci-fi and all that stuff. That's what we did.
Yeah, and also I would say too, a thing that was important that people would always do is that these are stories where like female identifying characters and or queer characters and or like BIPOC characters like get to save the world and kiss the person. Do you know what I mean?
And that was the secret.
Yeah.
The mission was like the outward mission. We're a pop culture company. The secret mission was like actually what we don't realize is that we redefine how you saw heroes, right? And so this was like a very early experiment in that. Like Robert, we were talking about yesterday, Living Dead in Denmark was, though it was like our third production, or second production, it was still very early in us trying to figure out how to do it. And so that was the metaphor, but it was pretty like hammer on head, like as a metaphor. And we got maybe more subtle nuance later, maybe not. But that was the
Well, and that was the first two shows we sort of co-written and co-directed, and this was the first one that Pooh was like, I want to write it. I was like, okay, I guess I'll direct it. And that was like a whole new thing.
When you guys play D&D, what's your favorite character to play?
Half thief? Yeah, 100%. I mean, during the pandemic, no, but I was like a half orc monk in that game. But during the pandemic, we had little Quincy and shit.
Oh, yeah.
When as a kid, like I had to rent a box. But we're bad at it. You need to sort of be brought in by someone who knows more, right? So I had like 3 friends and we opened up, the red box, like that's the basic edition back in the 80s. And we like spent an afternoon like around my dining table, and then we were just like, you want to play in the woods? Yeah. It was much more fun to like run around with sticks and pretend that
Yeah.
well,
I usually like a rogue or a thief somewhere. Rarely a review, so I'm always looking for something like that. Occasionally. That's the story you said,
some of your stories are kind of out there, your own opinion. Did you find when working with Disney, which usually seems to be kind of almost like Hallmark, some of those are very predictable, did you think did they expect you to change, or did you did it help that you were a certain age of, I've already found what I want to do, and were you appreciative of that? Like, did they ask you to kind of evolve it into?
Well, it's interesting. Like with Disney, I've done like 2 major. Well, I've done 3. Like one I'm not officially on, but like the 2 major films that my name's on Like, one of them was integral that I was on it, which was Raya the Last Dragon. It was actually, we're not getting recorded, right?
No.
This is Raya was a movie that was in trouble. Like, it was definitely like, and this is not movie, like, making movies, we always fall into a moment where like, oh god, we just sunk a lot of money into a thing that's not going to work out.
And you were in the middle of a different project.
I was in a totally different film at the time. And so they kind of just brought my director, Don Hall, in, who had, who came in to help Moana. And basically, director's record is different than the person who really led it. Don kind of was the reason why Moana became Moana. And so they're like, if you do that again with this project with Raya, so he came on and he was like, cool, I know how to like do this by craft, but the thing that this movie's missing is any kind of heart. And so we need someone who gives all the crafts about it. You should ask creative feedback something. And so I came in, I watched the film, and he was right. It was just a series of pictures. Like they spent a lot of money making the characters look the way they did. We rigged it, the sets were all built, and there was no score. And so I was like, I do have a take, but it's really complicated. It's probably too long for me to pitch to Jen. What if I just write a screenplay over the weekend? And he's like, you can write a whole screenplay over a weekend? And I was like, yeah. And so that's what I did. I went home on Friday, I wrote a whole screenplay, wrote it on Monday, gave it to Don read it. He's like, holy crap, you wrote not just a screenplay, you wrote a really good one. Gave it to Jen, and I brought it to Jen. She's like, green light, go. And so then we had a year and a half.
And I'll say two things. I feel like you have the superpower as a writer to absolutely shut off your editor.
Yeah.
Like you can take your editor, lock it in a room, and it will make no judgment call on the script until the draft is done. Which just allows for you to kind of like it's loud. Like you feel the keys like and so I think that's one thing. And then I think two, like when I sat down to watch Raya, I was like, this is a vampire cowboy story. Like in a weird way, you had like a decade of like goes at telling that kind of story that allowed you to like tell that. You know what I mean? Like in a very specific, like only you could do that way. Like that was it. You were like, I know how to write this.
So in that way, Disney loved me. In other words, then after that, I got a little cocky. And every time I was like, what if we did this? What if we did that? And they're like, okay, we're going to do all those things. We're not going to fire. And, you know, like apparently Don and I made some board members a little angry with regard to follow-up with Strange World. And so there's fun. And I don't know, you know, again, like I can't say those board members are indicative of the whole company at all, but there were, you know, like you're an artist within a system. Sometimes the system really enjoys you, sometimes it really pushes against you. But they still buy stuff from me a lot, so I think they like me, and they won't let me go away, so there's that. But sometimes I appreciate it, sometimes I can tell. They really like, can you just not do that? I was like, you know, I won't know.
I'm just wondering, as you get older, you talked about children and your family. I'm curious, what do you think, if somebody would say, what is the legacy I would like to leave behind? And you talked about like telling the story of your family. What do you think your legacy is and continue moving forward would be of someone? As your kids look back, you know, you would want to.
Oh man, like that. I remember when I was over at work, and I remember talking to Nate Moore, sorry. And he is a producer on Black Man, with Ryan Wheeler, of course. And I remember asking him, like, how do you know this is a success? Not just a box office. Is that what Marvel made something? He's like, I know it's a success when Halloween rolls around and white kids out there working white people. Because there's something really, really powerful having, because, you know, as a not white person, we're always having to pretend to be white characters all the time. And so we're like, oh look, there's Asian Superman, there goes like Black Batman, like, we always have to do it, but to have a moment where the white kid has to not get, they have to, Black Panther, but they're also saying, hey, but if we're putting this character that's cool, is something that's inherently you and yours, right? That's your race. And I was like, oh man, that's really cool. And so when I sat down to do Raya, I wanted the same. I was like, I want my kids not to, to necessarily dress up as Raya, because I mean, if they want to, I'd be totally cool with it, but I remember the Halloween afterwards, like little Raya was coming to my door of all different races, and my kids were so excited. They were just like, there's so many Rayas in the lot. Yeah, it's pretty cool, and I remember watching, that's what you were talking about. I was like, that is what I'm talking about. I don't know if that's my legacy per se. I don't think I think about that, but it's just like this little mission that I'm trying to always do with this stuff in hopes that my kids get to see something that will empower them. That was superheroes. I wrote those about my parents. I didn't get to know them because there's a language barrier to my kids who only speak English. My parents who primarily don't speak Vietnamese. I got to tell their stories using my language, so my kids can hear those stories. So it's always this legacy directly to them. I'm writing all this shit for you kids. And they sometimes appreciate it, sometimes they're just really annoyed by me all the time. But because I talk to myself a lot in the house, that's the way you dialogue. You're like, yeah, it sounds crazy again. He's just angry in the room, pretending to have a fight.
I know earlier you talked about the nuances in storytelling from film and TV and how it's often physical. I'm just curious, what are like your favorite, I guess, differences, nuances, kind of special things about storytelling that is strictly physical?
Strictly physical. Well, I mean, I love telling stories that are kind of just wordless, because I think for me it's always been like I'm a bit of a micromanager as a choreographer. Like when I choreograph fights, like I picture like when I choreograph fights, it's not a interpretation. It is about these are the moves. You have to be in this spot. So they all like it's very particular. And so when I go down to shoot something, I have that same exact knot. I have a very particular. The framing has to be here. This is where it needs to be. I'm not the part that I'm like, please sit in the room, he's gonna play with it. I'm not that guy when I make a film or when I'm working a film. When I'm in theater though, I love that thing because no matter how
Sony goes at it.
Yeah, Sony goes at it, but also like I can't there's no the width of the space is going to make you see it here. So then it is right. I thought when you were gonna ask me like I always read one would like usually but I usually have no answer to that anytime. I like them all. But I was going to see that love about theater. The one thing that I was like, it's the only medium out of the things that I that has this actual honest to it, right? Because like everything else is in fact similar, a reality. And like if you're doing a film, you can tell it's bullshit because you can edit it, music behind it. You're doing a documentary, even like I've done a documentary. Like when I cut out also incorporates change the reality. And in this medium that looks like the most bullshit ever, with you literally cardboard walls, there's the thing that's honest enough. The thing that's always real, the thing that is that relationship between actors and audience. They laugh a lot, they get a little quiet, you can drop down into your more emotional ones. It's that relationship. And I love it. That's the reason why I'm watching Playwright over again, because of this one exchange. It's not just the exchange of my writing or Marvel's record to you guys, it's what you guys do to them and what they give to you. That relationship is always silent. It is also the thing that probably was we started with. It's always an interaction in a way that like sometimes I love film just because I don't have to deal with this part. That part's really hard sometimes. It's like when you're like, oh, because theater's very vulnerable. I think probably stand up is probably more of that, but I don't do stand up, so I'm not gonna say that.
I mean, except for this.
I don't know if this applies to you, but
it. I don't and it's mainly because I don't allow myself, right? I do the thing, and it's all a trick, right? Do I hit walls? Absolutely. But what I do is just write something else, right? Like in the moment, like when I'm writing a scene, I'm like, oh, I don't know what's happening in that scene. I just go bullshit, 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 and just write the next thing on the side. Because like as I write that, I'm like, oh, I know what that is, and I just go back. But as Robert said, I cut off my editor brain, and my goal is just to get to page 90, page 100, whatever, as fast as I possibly can. Because I think the best version of me as a writer is me as a rewriter, as an editor. The shittiest version of me as a writer is the person writing. And so if I know that draft is going to suck anyways, then there's no reason to stop. There's no reason to be like, what do I need to say? Like, I want to hear that. So I always let myself make all the shitty first choices and just run as fast as I can to the end. So it's hard.
Like, usually the thing we worked on, you sent me like a very early draft or something. You're like, I just banged this out as a scene and we can't get to the edges yet, or whatever. Like, and it's like a pencil sketch. Do you know what I mean? With like broad strokes, where Qui's like here, and this is like here, and then it goes over here. Like, he's just kind of like laying it out there, and then he goes back and like has all the detail. But it's a powerful thing to be able to do it.
But also, I strictly write off my outline. So I have a very strong process. I outline everything. So then, if I'm like, oh, the things that would be like a natural block, I already know what the next step is because I already have the numbers down and coloring to it. And two, I don't put my research into the things I do, but like I do a lot of like just fun research that will like the more I know, the easier it is to just kind of bullshit a couple pages. Like I'm like, oh, now he's gonna like mansplain some stuff right here in this plot. So and then each always gets cut out, right? Like you'll get to a point like, well, let me explain to you exactly how quantum time dialect works. And I just write it in a big long page. I'm like, okay, that was stupid. But now I understand something about my character, and then I can just go back.
I feel like tell me if this isn't true, but like, what's the line in Amadeus, the Mozart who does that symphony or whatever, and he's like, it's all done up in here in my head, the rest is just scribbling. Like, I feel like you spend a lot of time preparing to write. Do you know what I mean? You're not sort of like working on it at the keyboard, you're like talking about it, you're like, yeah, it doesn't work at the end, like, oh, what happens there? And like, you don't start to write until you have that outline that is like, now I know what it is, and that's when you get into like,
yeah. There's a lot of like, I have a nice whiteboard bulletin board beside me that has like multiple stories happening at each given point. You know, like, okay, my wife walks in and says, listen, what are you doing? Oh, that's he's not very walks out.
Do you think that the geek culture lens of your work has changed at all, with it becoming a lot more mainstream?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that like, you know, when Robert and I started doing this stuff, like he was like a very, he was outsider in the storytelling, right? And then we kind of lucked out because the rise of Comic-Con and Vampire Cowboy kind of came and Birth of MC all kind of came at the same time. And so we kind of got to ride that super wave of geek culture. And then when like geek culture manifested itself as a much more problematic thing, I think Robert and I were then having kids and kind of going, oh, there's a self-examination of like what geek and toxic fandom is and stuff like that, and how do we make that better? And so yeah, I think it has evolved for me as an artist in this world. That I think that there was times when like even the draft that you guys have done is like a third draft. Like most of the time I publish the thing and I just throw out the wall. That's the end of it. But I try to go back and fix things when I get shit. So a lot more than one way to do this. But I go back and try to fix some things that I think, oh, I have a sense of responsibility that joke was written at a time. It was a different time, but also it was never really actually like that. And that's not just for me, but for just like these kids who are going to be doing it. I think for the most part, like my place is mostly produced by college and high school kids because it's so pop culture. And because of that, I feel like there's a lot of responsibility. When schools call me, they're like, hey, do you want to talk to my kids about this character, this role, this element that they're having a problem with? I'm always open to yeah, that our relationship to geek culture has evolved.
And I feel like there's a greater, all those jokes and some, we're far more aware of how jokes should punch up always and never punch down. And sometimes there was that feeling in the early days that like, oh, I don't know, we're sort of sticking it to the racists by putting this racism in here. And now it's just like, no, that's not the reason at all.
Sorry, this might have to be our last one. No, go ahead. Yeah.
Earlier you briefly mentioned having ADHD. Are there any like struggles that came from that you had to work through, or ways that has affected your work positively or negatively?
Well, to be clear, I'm not clinically diagnosed with ADHD. Like, I kind of figured this out because my youngest son is, and we were going through like this questionnaire in terms of examination. They're like, okay, so there's like, I think it was 10 or 12 questions, or maybe it was 10. No, it was a lot. And so like, they're just asking like, oh, how did you respond to blah blah? And he was like saying yeses to like 7 of them or 8, and then you're like, okay, well, usually if someone answers yes after 5, we kind of complicated it. ADHD diagnosis. I was like, cool. What if yes was to all 12? And her response was like, it is great. and so I was like, oh fuck. And it's like, well, what are you going to do now? Because he's on medication. I was like, well, I'm like, well, I'm scared it will mess up my process now. And of course I went home and told my wife, and I was like, so it turns out, and my wife was like, no shit. I've been married to you for 20, I know. Part of why you write so fast is because of that, idiot.
You look around the rehearsal room and think of all the theater people you know.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
It's sort of like also like profile of people in the industry. We're like at the table and want some ideas, and then we're like, dude, we'll do that after. Okay.
We're all a little bit